So today is a follow-up review of this camera here. This is the EOS R5. I want to keep it short because I have done 9 photo shoots with it and I want to share with you my opinions of this camera here. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions. This is the EOS R5 and it is a follow-up review. If you have not seen my previous one, do click on the link up there or in the descriptions below. Now, this is a copy that I purchased myself. The previous one has already been returned to SLR Revolution. I like to thank them a lot for actually loaning me the copy there, because without it, I wouldn't know how good the R5 is out in the field. So now I have my own copy. I have done about, I think, 9 photo shoots with the EOS R5. So I have quite a bit of opinions of what this camera do in the real world. Now, these shoots are real shoots. They have a model and I have outputs to post, to give people, to submit for assignments. And really, these are what I would say as real world shoots. And they are valid experience, especially when it comes to portraiture. So the thing is that in the R5 itself, there are a few points I want to talk about: autofocus, IBIS, and dynamic range. In addition to that, I want to cover a bit of birding, and that is not done by me, it's done by my friend Farid, and he has some experience in the birding itself. And I will end off this whole video with some sort of a conclusion, and I will have a final review video in probably a month or 2 time, because I'm going to do about 20-30 shoots before I do that video itself. Without further ado, let's talk about the first section, which is autofocus. So the thing is that the R5 has a really good autofocus system. I would say its reliability is very good as long as it shows you the box. The point itself, I would say it has a 99% hit rate on the point that it shows. It is that accurate. The thing is that in my previous video, I talked a lot about IAF, and with these 9 shoots itself, I would say 5 shoots had perfect IAF, which means I don't even need to touch the controller to select a point and the eye will be detected. And the other 4 shoots didn't really have perfect results. So which are the 4 shoots with not perfect results? Let's start with the 3 that require some sort of assist first. Firstly, one is at the beach. This is Yukiko with her Nero costume. That one requires me to set my initial AF point onto the eye, and then it detects the eye already, and then it magically works really well. The second one is with Reiko, and she's wearing a yukata, and same thing here. I have to set the AF on the eye and it works really well. And the last one is with Cheryl, and this one was I would say as a low light shoot. It's done in available light, and I was using a power tube 6C to light her up on her face. So this was a really dark shoot itself, and the same thing happened. I have to set an initial point on the eye, and then it locks up very well. I can recompose, and the IAF does keep itself there. Now, for these 3 shoots itself, 2 had something in common, is that they weren't, I would say, as normal clothes, so maybe it does affect the IAF there. While the last one is probably due to low light, and it can't detect the eye properly, so it need a bit of help to do that. And to really back up that point, the shoot that couldn't even IAF, where I have to manually select a single AF point, put it on the eye, and hold it there, because IAF just doesn't kick in for that shoot no matter what I do. And that is this shot here. Now, this was done in low light. It was the same condition as the previous one. However, the difference is that this is done with flash, so there was no light lighting her face directly. It was really dark. Her face was really underexposed, and you can see that this small little bulbs on the staircase was flaring into the lens while I'm using it. If I was trying to do it without exposure simulation, the flare was really strong, and if I was using exposure simulation, and her face would be very dark. So in this particular shoot here, and she's wearing a costume and she's cosplaying Nero again, one of the dress version, her eyes was totally something that could not be detected by the camera itself. So just to note that if you are not wearing normal clothes or in normal fashion, casual portraiture type of clothes, the IAF may not work. So for cosplay purposes, it works, it may not work. And normally, if it doesn't work, it's really due to a combination of both the costume and low light. Because I have another shot here, and you can see this is Saria. It's also a cosplay, and this was done in the studio. And in this case, because the studio was really bright, IAF was really consistent. It always hits the eye, and I didn't even need to select an AF point. So it doesn't mean that cosplay doesn't work. It's just that certain cosplay just don't work as well as others, and I couldn't really explain And that is pretty much it for IAF or AF in general. Now the speed of the AF, however, is really good. As long as you can lock onto her eye, no matter how she moves, the AF is spot on. In fact, for my Saria shoot, I was firing the shots in seconds and the AF was always accurate. I would say as the focus accuracy of this camera here is easily 99% for me. And even when the model is jumping, twirling, running, moving towards you, moving away from you, 90 to 95% hit rate is pretty much confirmed. In fact, I almost never check my sharpness these days with the R5, and that is how confident I am in the AF system of the EOS R5. Now let's move on to the next point, which is IBIS itself. So IBIS of this camera is really good. 1.5, 1.3, I would say as 110 can be handheld quite well. When I was using the 85mm, I tried 1.5. It could do really well. When I was trying with this 2870 at 70mm, I could actually also do 1.5 really well. Now, in real world, however, it is not that simple. There are two factors to it. Firstly, there is the model shake. So if the model was moving around, 1.5 probably won't hold up really well. And secondly is the AF system. Now, if you are doing one shot, it's okay because it AFs and it stops there. Now, if you're trying to do eye detection with servo, however, the servo will go crazy because the model is actually moving slightly forward and slightly backward. So it's the human, the camera operator or the photographer is also moving slightly forward, slightly backward. And the servo is compensating. So yes, you can have really good IBIS that can do 1.5, 1.10. But because of the small little micro movements in the servo or the micro movements in the model itself, it pretty much destroys the photo sharpness in every way. So if you ask me, if you're using one shot AF and you are shooting a live model, 120 is probably the lowest you can go, at least from my experience itself. And if you want to use servo and IAF, 140 is probably the lowest. Below 140, pretty much the servo AF will destroy the sharpness of the photo. And that is pretty much my finding for IBIS. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is dynamic range. So as you can see, I've shown you quite a bit of shots here. So there are shots in really bright sunlight like this, and there are shots with really dark background, and there's one shot at night. I told you I was lighting her with a PowerTube 6C, so there was a lot of recovery required. More often than not, I would say as the real world dynamic range is about 3 stops, and when you raise 3 stops, the shadow is not too intrusive, the color retention is pretty good, and overall it is quite usable. Now, the most important thing of this camera here, however, is the highlight recovery. I do notice that if the skin was to burn, which means, if you were having some sort of highlight notice, highlight alert on the skin, this camera can actually recover the skin tone for about a stop without, I would say as showing major discoloration in the skin itself. Now, with other cameras like the GFX100 and the previous EOS R, and I also believe the A7 R4, when I tried it then, when the highlight alert do come in and the skin gets blown off, I'll say as when you do recover, there is some slight tinting. And with the EOS R5, I have no issues. In fact, take a look at some of these photos here. All these photos have the same issue because I was using 1/8000 shutter, the very maximum shutter speed of the EOS R5 with a f1.2 lens, and it was too bright. So in my preview, it's always on highlight alert. However, in post-production, I could easily pull back some of the highlights and had really good skin tones thereafter. So the highlight recovery of this camera, yes, it's about 1.5 stop as I last said in my previous review. However, the retention of the color seems to be slightly better. Now, I'm not sure really, is it really better? But at least in my personal opinion, when it comes to real world shooting and real world editing itself, the highlight recovery on this camera seems to be slightly better than the competition out there. At least when it comes to retaining skin tone colors, which is really important. Now, if you can go and try, you can go and highlight. You can just blow your highlights in some of your shots, especially when shooting humans. When you recover the skin tone, normally it will turn really yellow or some tints of yellow-green. But this R5 do not seem to exhibit that effect itself. So, really nice highlight recovery capabilities on the EOS R5. Now, that is pretty much it for my opinions. I've done 9 photo shoots in various conditions. I would say it works perfectly well, be it studio, indoor, outdoor, under artificial light with strobe. I was using the Godox strobe system and it works and fires really well. Every shot was fired and every shot was done nicely. I didn't miss any shot with flash itself. So in terms of communication and really usage, I feel was pretty okay. Now there's one thing I want to touch on, which is wireless tethering. This camera with the image transfer software installed on your laptop does wireless tether at 8 seconds for RAW. Now 8 seconds isn't too short or too long, and if you ask me, it's pretty acceptable. The only problem now is that Lightroom and Capture One do not natively read the RAW itself, so even though you can transfer the RAW and preview in the image transfer tool, the preview is really lousy. You can't zoom in or anything, so you probably have to wait for Lightroom to utilize this fully. Now there is a wireless grip which I actually borrowed and tried. I was hoping that you could transfer the file in less than 8 seconds. 4 seconds or 3 seconds would have been great. However, to my disappointment, it did not change the transfer speed in any way. It was still 8 seconds, so it's probably kept by the CPU inside the camera itself. 8 seconds is probably the fastest you can transfer a RAW file of the EOS R5. That's pretty much it for my experience of using the camera R5 here as a portrait camera. As you can see, I tried a lot of situations. Some work, some don't, but overall, I still hold my previous review that the R5 is probably one of the best camera you can get for stills photography, especially because the 50 and 85 mm f1.2 was such fantastic lens to really use in real life. I really enjoy using the 85 and 50 1.2s. This is something that the GFX could not give me. Absolute sharpness, nice, shallow, and smooth bokeh. These are things that really, I would say, as something that Canon could give and no other system can. Now there is one last thing I want to talk about, which is the birding. And my friend Farid has done birding with the R5. He used the 600mm. I can show you some photos here. The 600mm version 2 and version 3s. Now he said that for birding itself, this camera, the R5 with the adapter and the 600mm, could pretty much catch the bird really well. The bird could fly, glide, and also dive, and the R5 can capture those photos really well. Now for bird animal IAF, it works for gliding, it also works for perching, but it doesn't work for diving, at least for eagles themselves. When the eagle do dive for the fish, he said that the IAF do not kick in. So during those points, it's usually wide area AF and you will track the eagle pretty much well. Now with the 602, the photo seems a touch soft, but he was saying that with the 600 version 3, it is really good and easily approaches the A9 and 600 GM, which is one of the best birding equipment out there today. So the R5 is a high megapixel version of the A9, which he was really happy with it and all out to buy the R5. Now the thing is that the R5 had a flaw, and that is that it cannot use the TC. So what happens is that the old teleconverter that can be used on those primes with the R5 seems to be a bit slow, and it tends to back focus a lot. So he's still waiting if there is a better TC or some way to mount the RF TC on it. Doesn't seem to have any solution today. So without the TC itself, yes, the R5 has the megapixel advantage over the A9, but the A9 could mount a TC and have native autofocus speed. That's what he's telling me. He said that the A9 with the TC and the 600mm is as good as the R5 with the native 600mm. So yes, you got more megapixels, but because you don't have the TC, you still cannot capture the bird in as big as a frame as possible. So that is something that you need to note with the R5. The TCs today do not work as good as you would like it to do on the R5, while the 600mm's version 2 and version 3 pretty much work very well as birding lenses for the EOS R5 itself. Now, let's move on to my conclusions of this R5. The R5 is a really, really good camera. As I said earlier, this is probably one of the best stills camera you can get. If you are a Canon user with EF glass, the R5 will breathe new life to your EF glass because the autofocus system is so good. If it can bird with a 600mm, which is an EF mount lens, I'm sure that any other lens with a USM motor that is not too old will probably work very well on the R5. The focus system will probably be top notch, and it will maybe be better even than the 5D Mark IVs, which is a native EF mount. Other than that, I do not know what else to say other than if you own any sort of Canon lens, be it the EF or the RF, testing out the R5 is really something you should do. Now, there is the EOS R6, which is 20 megapixels. I'm waiting for my supplier or Canon to loan me a copy because I want to try whether is it already a cheaper alternative to the R5 with just a loss in megapixels itself. Canon claims that the only loss is the megapixel and the top LCD, but I'm sure that Canon always like to throw some curveballs inside their marketing. So we have to take a look at see what's going to happen with the R6. Is it really a R5 with less megapixel, or is there some drawback, be it dynamic range or what? Until the R6 proved itself that it has a dynamic range that can par the R5. At least the 1DX Mark III could not par the R5. So we have to wait and see. Till then, I will see you in my next review, maybe with the R6 or something else, and I would like to see you again. Bye bye.